Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on transition tools and tips. My name is Erol Kilic, and I'll be with you for the next hour or so. We're going to go over some of our transition tools and some best practice tips on how to get your funds onto the TMS and onto class as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Just before we get cracking on the agenda, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping. So a copy of the PowerPoint will be available to download via the webinar handouts. We'll also be taking questions during the webinar via the chat window. However, we will be sharing the answer to those questions in a couple of days' time. We'll also send out a summary of every question and answer from this session. We will also publish a recording of this webinar on our class education page. Finally, at the conclusion of this webinar, we would love it if you could take a moment or two to complete a short survey on your experience today. So today we're going to cover off a few things. We're going to talk about the Transitions Management System, the TMS, which is the main interface that we use to get your files securely across to our transitions team to upload to class. We're going to talk about the class transition tool, what it's used for and some of the improvements we've made there. We're going to talk about the manual data collection form. We're going to talk about some changes we've made to the Excel fund loader as well, particularly around getting your historical T-bar records into class. We're going to talk about transitions reviews and how that process sort of works. And we're also going to talk about the new user guide, specifically in relation to transitions and how you can navigate around there and find what you need to get your funds onto class. Just a little bit about myself. So as I mentioned before, my name is Erol Kilic. I'm the consulting manager here at Class. I've got about 12 years of experience in the SMSF industry. I joined Class in 2009. I was the transitions manager from 2010 to about 2015. And I've been the consulting manager since March last year. So just before we do get cracking, just wanted to start off with a poll. So just wanted to find out which of the following would improve your transition experience the most. So you'll be able to select just one of these answers. So the answers, we'll go through them now. I've got improvements to the TMS and class transitions tool, ability to load historical performance data, transitioning manual funds and portfolios, loading T-bar history, and loading operating statement comparative. So which of those would improve your transition experience the most? We'll just give you a few seconds to answer that question. If you could just go through and do that. So we will be giving you guys the results of these polls in the next couple of days as well. So you won't get the results straight away, but if you could just go in and answer that question for us, that would be much appreciated for us. Just a couple more seconds and we might just close it off there. So thank you very much. As I said, we will be sharing the results of that poll a little bit later on. Okay, so let's get cracking. So we're going to start off with a TMS, the Transitions Management System. We're going to start off by having a look at how you get there and some of the basics around how you use it. So I'm going to start off by just starting in class. I'm going to get out of that PowerPoint presentation and jump into class. So I'm just here at the business level console. So this is the first screen that you'll see when you log into class. To access the TMS, what we're going to do, we're going to click on Business, and then we're going to click on Upload Funds. Now, because I'm already logged into class, TMS will be smart enough to know that I've got access to class and it will automatically log me into TMS. If you've got access to class, you've got access to TMS, business level access, I should say. Now, if it's the first time you're using TMS, then you will be required to answer a couple of additional questions. So it'll ask you your name, it'll ask you default brand, default business, and default migration source. But once you've done that, you should get to arrive at this batch list. So this batch list essentially shows us any batches of funds that we've previously uploaded through TMS for class to load up for us. Now I'm going to go through and show you a couple of features on this screen. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is this Guide Me button. So if you actually click on this Guide Me button, what it's going to do is take you through step by step how to create a batch and then how to submit that batch to class. So it is a very useful tool. If you log on and you want to have a crack at creating a batch of funds after the webinar and you forget how you or what you want to do or you forget the instructions, what you can do is click on the Guide Me link and it will actually take you through step by step where you should click to create a batch. So I'm not going to use the Guide Me button. What I'm going to do is click on the Add Batch button here to go and start the process of creating a new batch. So when we select Add Batch, it will open up a new batch details window. So from here, we would select a business code and a brand. So in this scenario, I'm just going to leave that as is. But what I am going to do is change the migration source. So I'm not migrating my fund from BGL. What I'm doing is migrating it from a manual source. So I'll select manual. Next, you should have a review of the fee schedule and make sure that you agree to it. If you do, click on the little tick box here and also have a review of our privacy policy and accept the conditions there. So if you're happy with that policy, you can click on the little tick box here. When you do that, a create button will appear down the bottom here. So I'm going to click on create and this will go and create a new batch for us. So we're at the fund list screen. So from here, we've got a couple of options. So you can click on the click here to add new fund button and you can go in and type in your fund code and fund name. If you've got multiple funds, you may want to actually upload a CSV. So the CSV file should contain 2 columns, fund code and fund name, and make sure you save it as a CSV. I've got one that I prepared earlier, so I'm just going to go and upload that fund list. So here it is here. And you can see here that it's basically gone in and created a new fund list for us. Now, at this point, I'm going to show you the download file structure button. So what the download file structure button does is it essentially goes and creates a zip folder, which forms a template for you to use to generate your data files and reports. This is particularly useful if you've got multiple funds that you're loading for a batch. So in this scenario, we're loading 3 funds. So if I open up my zip file, what you're going to see in there is a folder that's been created for each of those files or each of those funds. And so what we're saying here is by using this structure, we would go in and we would basically load in all of the reports and files that we required for this Test 700 fund in here. And then basically we would go and zip this file up and upload that in the next step in our upload files window. So it just makes it a little bit easier to collate the files and put them into folders rather than going through and creating a folder for each fund that you want to load up. Now, some other tips around the fund code. So you can't have any spaces in your fund code. If you do put a fund space, or if you do put a space in the fund code, the batch will end up with an error. If you do have a space, you can replace it with an underscore, for example, or just get rid of it. You can also only have alphanumeric characters in your fund name and fund code. So you can't have things like percentages or dollar signs or hashtags or anything. And that will actually prevent you from loading up your CSV file as well. So if you've got funny characters in your CSV file, then you will actually get an error and it won't actually let you load those funds in. So I'm just going to delete these funds because I only actually need the one fund to load to class. I'm going to talk about these additional services here. So you can actually request the transition team to perform some services that are not part of the standard transition. The first one there is a portfolio reconstruction. And so what we're talking about here is a scenario where you've been processing a wrap account as a one-line asset, and you now want to split that out and show all of the holdings in that wrap. The transitions team can do that for you. So you can tick that tick box if you'd like them to do that. If you've got some bank statements that you'd like the transitions team to enter in, you can tick the requires transaction transcription. And if you would like the transitions team to create a depreciation schedule for you, you can just tick that tick box. And please note that if you do request additional services, that there will probably be a charge for those because these aren't part of the standard transition, and also will require additional information. So for example, if you want us to load your depreciation schedule, then obviously you should provide that depreciation schedule for the team to load those up for you. So I'm not going to use any of those additional services in this scenario. So I'm just going to go and click on the next step button. And so the next step button is where you upload your data files and reports. So if we go and have a look at our checklist here, this will tell you the reports that we require. So once you've collated all of those, if you click on upload files, that will allow you to navigate to wherever your files are saved and simply upload them. As I mentioned before, it's best practice to, especially if you've got multiple files, put them into a folder and then zip that folder and then upload that here so that you don't have to go one by one. You can also drag and drop your files here to load them up as well. Now, if you wanted to get rid of that file, if it was the wrong one, you can just click on the little bin icon over here. So I've now loaded all of the files that I require. So I'm going to click on next step. And what the TMS does is it will do a quick validation to try and match off the files that we typically require against our checklist. In this scenario, I've only loaded the one file, so it's telling me that there are some unmatched funds. Now, if you're confident that the files you've provided are going to be enough for the transitions team to upload the fund, then you can continue to manual mapping. However, if you decide that you do need to add additional files, you can click on the upload additional files button. So I'm confident that I've got everything I require to load the fund to class. So I'm going to click on continue to manual mapping. And from here, if you wanted to let the transition team know anything, you could add a note, but otherwise you can actually go and submit that batch. So I'm going to confirm and submit that batch. So you can see here that that batch that we've just submitted is sitting here in a submitted status. So I'm going to go and talk about these statuses now because we've got a few of them. So the first one I'll talk about is the unsubmitted status. So if you've created a batch on TMS and you have not yet submitted that to class, it will be sitting here in your batches screen as an unsubmitted batch. That means that nobody at class is looking at that batch. So a couple of scenarios where this might be the case. One is that you've created the batch, but you've just forgotten to submit that batch. As I mentioned, nobody's actually looking at that batch. So you just need to go in and make sure you submit that batch. Another scenario might be that you've created the batch, but you realize that you need a couple more files. So in that scenario, it's okay for it to be sitting there as an unsubmitted batch. When you get that file, you will be submitting that fund. But if there's any batches that are sitting as an unsubmitted batch in your batch list, if there are any funds that are sitting as an unsubmitted, note that we are not currently looking at those. So if you've created a new batch and submitted it later, you should actually go through and get rid of any batches you don't actually require. We've also got a submitted status. So the submitted status basically means that you've submitted the batch to class, but no one's actually started looking at that fund yet. So it should only be in the submitted status for a very short amount of time. Basically, as soon as the batch gets allocated to a transitions consultant, it will change over from submitted to in progress. While it's in progress, what will happen is we'll work on that fund. When we complete the fund, what will happen is you'll get an email that'll let you know the fund has been completed, and the status will change. So the status of the batch will remain in progress, but the status of the fund will change to review. We've also got a reopened status. Now, a reopened batch generally happens where there is a report or a file missing across every single fund in the batch. How that varies, or how that's different from a queried fund, is that a queried fund is specific to a fund. So we'll go into queried funds in a bit more detail in a second, but so say you had a batch of 10 funds. In the scenario where every single one of those 10 funds was missing the same report, we would reopen the entire batch and ask you to upload that report. If 9 of those funds were able to be successfully loaded and we actually only needed that report for one fund, then we would only query that one fund. So that's the difference between a reopened and a queried batch. A reopened batch applies to all of the funds in that batch, whereas a queried fund will apply only to a specific fund. We've also got a closed status. So a batch will go into a closed status when you have reviewed the fund and accepted it, or if it's been 3 months and you haven't accepted it, class will automatically close that batch off for you. So we will go into how to review your funds in a bit more detail later on, but generally when the fund is completed, we generally recommend that you review the fund. If you accept everything in that fund, you click a little tick box and that will close that batch off. So I mentioned queried funds earlier. So I'm going to show you how you can actually resolve a query. So what will happen in this scenario, we've got a fund here. It's for our user guide, so it's batch number 7, and basically it's sitting here as a queried state. So what's happened, we've submitted the batch, the transitions team has started to work on it, and they've realized that they actually need additional information for it. They've queried that fund, which means that whoever loaded that fund will get an email letting them know, and it will be sitting in this batch list as a queried fund. So what we want you to do with queried funds is go in and review those and provide the additional information that we require. So if I click on the little chevron here, we can see here that, that we're actually querying this fund because we require member statements. So if I click on the action button here, this will take you to the resolve query screen. And so from here, you can either type in a query response. So say in this scenario, the member statements were already in the portfolio data collection form. We can just write that here. Or if we need to add in a new file, we can click on this add files button and then go in and navigate to that required file and just upload that. So once we've done that, what we can do is respond to query, and that will then put that fund back into a status of in progress. So this will go back into the transition team's queue, and they will then go and have a crack at loading that fund. Again, if they need any further information, then they will query it. So an important note with querying funds is that it will slow down the transition process. So our preference is for you to provide all of the data files and reports up front, but we do understand that sometimes you might forget something. So. Okay, so we're going to talk about the class transitions tool now. Give you a very quick overview on some of the new features that we've got. So the class transitions tool is really only relevant for those of you who are trying to load funds from BGL Desktop. What the class transitions tool actually does is it will actually go through and pull out all of the data files that we require and upload those to TMS and create a batch in TMS, and it will do pretty much most of the steps that I just showed you earlier, where we went through and created a batch manually. So to download the class transitions tool, we actually need to go to the user guide. So I'm just going to go to the user guide, and I'm going to go to the BGL desktop checklist. If you've already got a downloaded version of the class transitions tool, I recommend that you go through and you download a new version of it, because obviously the latest updates won't automatically flow through to your installation of the tool. So make sure you do go into the BGL desktop checklist and click on this link here to download a copy of or an updated copy of the class transitions tool. Once you've downloaded it, it will download as a zip file. In that zip file, you're going to see a couple of files. I'll just wait for that to download. In that zip file, you're going to see a couple of files. You're going to see a class transitions tool application file and a config file. You just want to copy those two and just paste them somewhere like your desktop. It's probably a pretty good place to put them. Once you've done that, it's pretty much ready to use. So I'm just going to go and open up the class transitions tool. So you can see I've saved it on my desktop. And it's going to come in and ask me to log in with class. So again, it's single sign-on. I'm going to click on the login with class button here, and that will authenticate me and log me into the class transitions tool. So there it is, letting us know that I've been successfully authenticated. So once you've logged in, the system will ask you to select a business and brand. So I'm just going to leave that as is. I'm going to leave it as a user guide brand. And it will also go through and it will try and find where your BGL data files are kept. So what it's done is here, it's gone through and it has successfully found a few funds that will be ready to load up. Now, if you're going through, if for whatever reason, if you've got more than one S fund directory, what you can do is click on the use different BGL location button down the bottom here, and then navigate to wherever your S fund directory actually lives. But as I mentioned, it will go through and try to find your BGL files automatically if it can. So I'm just going to go and upload a file. So what you do here is, say I wanted to upload the Sunset Superannuation Fund. I will just go through and click that fund and then click on Upload Selected Funds. So as I mentioned, what this will do, this will bring up our fee schedule and privacy policy that we previously mentioned. I've reviewed all those, I'm happy with those. I'm going to click on Continue. So this will go and create a new batch on TMS. It will upload the data files that we require. It will put in our fund codes for us as well, and basically get it to a point where all we have to do is review the files and submit the batch in class, in TMS. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes for that to finish uploading. Okay, so that's now done. It's now completed loading up that file. You can see here on the right-hand side, it's telling us that that it has created a new batch in TMS, and that's batch number 11. So we could actually go and select this from here. So if I click on that link, it will actually take me to TMS and take me to the batch that it has created. So you can see here, if I just go back a screen, it's gone in and it's created that fund for us. There's the fund code and the fund name. If we go to the next steps, it's also uploaded all of the files that we require per the BGL checklist, and also the reports that we require as well. So basically, it'll take you to the upload file screen, and from here you would just click through next step, submit. So that's how you would use the BGL the class transitions tool to load any BGL files and reports straight through TMS to class. So if I go back and have a look at my batches, you can see that it is this user guide batch here, so batch number 11. So that batch corresponds with the batch number that we've got in class transitions tool as well. Just a note with the class transitions tool, we do generally recommend that you try to limit the batch loads that you give us. So we want you to try and give us no more than 20 funds at a time. This just makes the processing a bit easier at our end, and it will also make sure that that you don't spend all your time waiting for the tool to upload files. So just 20 funds at a time if you can. Now, I just wanted to go through some of the new features that we've recently implemented. So the first thing is when I actually signed in, and what I might do is just close out of there and open up the tool again. So when I actually signed into the transitions tool, I did it using single sign-on. So previously, you did have to go in and put in your username and password. However, now, if you're already logged in to class, if you just click on that login with class button, it will actually go through and log you into the tool. So if you weren't logged into class, what it would do is it would just take you to the normal class authentication screen and basically get you to put in your username and password from there. Now, the other one of the other changes we've made is that you can now select your business and brand code from here. So previously it would just go and pick the default business and brand that you'd set up in TMS, but you can now go and select a different business and brand if you want to. If you go and select your business and brand from there and decide later that you want to upload this to a different business, you can change that. So if you go to settings and click on business and brand from the settings menu at the top there, you can go back in and change that business and brand once again. Now, another improvement that we've made is that now the class transitions tool will also upload your reports. So when you're transitioning funds from BGL desktop to class, we require some data files from BGL. The class transitions tool has always been able to pick those up and upload those to TMS, and will require some reports. And previously, the class transitions tool was unable to pick up those reports and upload them to TMS. But with this new, with the latest release of the class transitions tool, it will actually go through and pick up your reports as well. So if I go back and have a look at the batch that I uploaded earlier, you can see here that it's gone through and it's selected or it's picked up those additional reports, and that's the reports that I ran for that fund earlier. So the workflow previously is to essentially load in your data files first and then go and run your reports and upload those to TMS. That's now changed. Now the workflow should be for you to run your reports first in BGL. Then when you use the class transitions tool, it will actually pick up those reports as well as the data files. So that could be a pretty significant time saving. So if you are coming across from BGL desktop, make sure you download the latest copy of the class transitions tool to ensure that it does pick up your reports as well as the data files. Now, another new feature that we've got is the ability to filter out by create entry dates. So we bring in the create entries date for you for your funds, and what you can actually do is go through and actually filter out whichever of the funds you want to load based on their create entries date. So if I only wanted to load in funds with a create entries date of 30 June 18, I could go through and pick that from the filter at the top here. And finally, the final change that we made to the class transitions tool is that this TMS batch number now goes and marries up with the batch number that we create in TMS. So previously it was a link to a batch ID. Now it's actually the batch number. So if you ever want to know which batch it was that was uploaded, you can just go here and find that corresponding batch. So as I mentioned before, this is batch 11 in TMS. If I go back into my TMS screen, I can see that that it is batch 11. So there it is there. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about the manual data collection form now. So the manual data collection form is actually relevant to those of you who are coming across from a manual system. We've made a couple of changes to the manual data collection form, but basically the premise of the manual data collection form is it's a catch-all form. So we've got one for SMSFs and one for our trust and our portfolios. They're basically the same thing, but essentially the way that it works is we would ask you to fill out the manual data collection form for each of the funds that you want to load to class. Now, to get the manual data collection form, you can just download it from the manual checklist. As I mentioned, we've got a manual checklist for SMSF and for portfolio and trust, and those data collection forms are slightly different, but in essence, they're the same thing. So I would ask you to go down and download a new version of it. If you've already got the manual data collection form, go to the manual SMSF checklist and download a fresh copy. So this is what it looks like. And essentially, as I mentioned, it's a catch-all that we ask you to fill out in the event that that we don't actually get a lot of this information. So when you're coming across from a manual system, those systems tend to be ledger-based, and so the general ledger doesn't typically have a lot of this information available. So that's why we would ask you to fill out one of these manual data collection forms. So this is your basic fund details. We've also got a members tab that's got your member details here, including the member balances, and then we would ask that you put in any pension balances in here as well. And then we've got the investments screen, so the investments tab rather. Now the investments tab, we would, in the past, what we would say about this tab and the members tab really is if you've actually got a report that covers this stuff, then don't worry about filling this out, because we can actually use the reports to load the funds onto class. Now what we're saying now is we've actually mapped this data collection form, and if you actually fill out this data collection form in this format, then the transitions team will be able to extract out the files and put it into class automatically. What this means for you is that it will speed up the time that it takes the transitions team to load the funds. And it also means that there's less chance of any data entry error, because we're essentially grabbing the data straight from this data collection form and loading it to class. Now, I can understand that it might be a little cumbersome to go through and fill out all of this information. And if you're happy to wait the week and a half, then that's fine. You can continue to send us the reports and we will load those into class as per your normal processes. But if you do want to speed up the process, and if you want to make sure that, or you want to reduce the chance that there are any data entry errors, then I would recommend that you enter in all of the information as it's asked for in these tabs, and that way we can just import that directly into class. Now I also want to show you the T-bar history. So this is a new tab, and basically if you would like the transitions team to load in the T-bar history for any of your funds, then we would ask that you fill out this tab as well as the other tabs. That way we can actually load in the T-bar history at the same time that we load in your funds. So we've made some changes to the Excel fund loader, and I'll go into those in a second, that actually allow us to load in historical T-bar records. But if you want us to load those in for you when we load the fund, we need you to fill out the T-bar tab. So if you do, as I mentioned, if you do have an old version of the data collection form, I'd urge you to go to our checklist on the user guide and download a new one, because it does have that T-bar tab, and it's also got the new branding on it. Okay, so as I mentioned just before, we've also got a a new loader. So just to give you guys a bit of context, the Excel Fund Loader is the tool that you would use to load in any funds that have opening balances into class. To download a fresh copy of the Excel Fund Loader, again, you would navigate from your fund list screen or the business console screen, click on Business, and under Fund, you'll have Excel Fund Loader. So from here, if you have multiple brands and you wanted to load your funds to a different brand, you could select whichever brand you want as a default. I'm just going to leave it as is. Click on the Click Here button, and that will download an Excel Fund Loader for us. So once again, if you do have an Excel Fund Loader on file that you've been using to load your funds onto class yourself, generally recommend you go in, definitely recommend rather, that you go in and get a new copy of the Excel Fund Loader to make sure that it's got all of the latest features. So if I open up my Excel Fund Loader, always make sure you enable editing and enable macros. Without that, it won't work. So this is the Excel Fund Loader. So you can see there's a new button down here. So for those of you who have used it before, you always had the Submit Fund Details and the Submit Opening Balances button, and it does look a little different. As I mentioned, we have got some new branding, but now there's also a Submit T-Bar Records button down the bottom here. So if you wanted to load historical T-Bar records, you would submit your fund details, you would submit your opening balances, and you would also need to submit your T-Bar records as well. So I do have an Excel loader that I prepared a little earlier. So this one has got all of the information filled in, and you can see here that it has validated. So it validates like all of the other tabs in the Excel Fund Loader. So this one's been validated, and so this would be ready to submit. So I'm just going to go to the T-Bar tab here to show you what it looks like. So this is it here, and basically what you would need to do is go and select your event type, select the member code, and then you will need to have a pension in order to attach the T-Bar record. Put in the date, a description, the amount, and then the lodgement status. So the lodgement status is important because if you do not, if you put it as not lodged, then in class, when you go to generate your next T-Bar file, it will actually try to lodge that file. So, so yeah, just be careful with that. But that is how you can actually upload your historical T-Bar records at the same time that you load in your funds to class. Now, if you've got T-Bar records from automated sources, so say you're loading a BGL file or a BGL desktop or BGL 360 transition, and you want to bring in your T-Bar records, what we would ask is you provide those T-Bar records to the transitions team at the time that you're loading the funds in order for them to load those into class for you. If you're unable to get them in any format that kind of makes sense, that we're able to decipher, then you can always use the fund data collection form and just fill out the T-Bar history tab. If you're unable to get any type of report that goes through and gives us a definitive list of all of the T-Bar records that have previously been lodged. Okay, so we're going to quickly do another poll. So in this poll, just going to ask you guys whether you used any of the following resources while you were transitioning your funds. So you can pick more than one. So if you go through, have a look at the answers. Did you use a user guide? Did you use the class online training modules? Were you emailing the transitions team? Were you looking at the TMS resources, including the Guide Me and the help in TMS? We're using the manual data collection form to help you load your funds. So as I mentioned, you can tick multiple answers here. We'll give you a few more seconds. We'll also give you the results of the poll in the next couple of days. So we'll give you guys another 5 seconds or so to answer that poll before we close that off. All right, thank you very much for those who've voted. I've now closed off that poll. So as I mentioned, we'll get those results out to you in the next couple of days. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the transition review. So once you've actually loaded your funds to the TMS, the transitions consultants will go through, make sure they've got everything they require, and then they will load those funds onto Class. As I mentioned before, they may query some funds, they may reopen a batch if they're missing files, but if they have everything they need, they will load those funds onto Class. Once those funds are loaded, whoever loaded that batch in the first place will get an email letting them know that the funds have been loaded and that they should go through and do a transitions review. Now, if I quickly navigate to my user guide, we've got a section in the user guide called Getting Started with Transitions. So it takes you through how to plan your transition and preparing your data files, and then how to load them as well. So a lot of what we covered today already. It also takes you through how to review entities that have been transitioned. So if you actually click on that link, it will take you through to the review guide that will essentially tell you how to review your funds. What we do is we load, in every single business that we create, we load a report package called a transitions report pack. And what we'll generally recommend you do is go into those transition report packs. So there it is there, transitions report package. Run that report pack, run the same reports from your old system, and make sure that what you've got in Class ties in with what you've got from your old system. So the reports that we generate from Class are your member statement, a balance sheet, an investment summary, an unrealized CGT report, and a contribution cap report. So we just want you to run those reports, make sure they're the same. In the event that you find a discrepancy, you've got two options. So you can, at this point, reject the fund, or you can go in and fix the issue yourself. So I'm going to show you how to actually reject a fund. So if we go back to the TMS and have a look at our batch list, so say I've just received the email from the team letting me know that this fund has been uploaded. How I know that this is completed also is it's in a review status. So this fund is ready for review. If I click on the little chevron icon here, it'll take me through to the review screen. And so from here, we've got a couple of options. So you can actually, if you click on that link, it will actually take you to the fund in Class. But if you've already done your checks and you're happy that this fund is correct, if you click on this little tick box, it'll accept the fund and close off the batch. If there's an error, or if you want to change one of the assumptions that the team has made, if you click on the little X button, it'll take you to the reject fund screen. And from here, you can go in and add in some free text. So say you were unhappy with the member balances, or maybe the member balance has changed. What you could do is type in that the member balance has changed, and then add some new files. So we want to add in a new member statement in this scenario. If it was just a matter of disagreeing with an assumption, you can put the review response in there and then just click reject fund. What that will do is that will create a workflow on the transitions consultant side and let them know that the fund has been rejected, and they will then go in and make those changes. Now, what I would say about rejecting funds is is if you go into a fund, you do a review, and you find that there are major errors, and it's going to take you, an hour to go in and fix those, then in that scenario, you should go in and reject the fund. Or if you're unhappy with an assumption that was made, go in and reject the funds. If you run the reports and find that it's just a straightforward fix, it's almost always certainly going to be quicker to actually go into class and make the change yourself. So as I said, it's completely up to you. If you want to, even if it's a small fix, if you want to get the transitions team to fix it, you can reject the fund, but note that that may take them a day or two to get that fixed. But if you notice that it's just a small issue, you can always go straight into class and make the change yourself. Now I'm going to show you the load opening balances page. So if I just go back to class and go into a fund. So let's just assume that this fund has recently been uploaded. So in this fund, let's just say that I've discovered that the member's name is incorrect. That is a situation where I would recommend that you quickly just go into your members, go to browse members, and then go into the member details screen and just make that change yourself, because it's going to be quicker than you rejecting the fund, typing it out, sending it to the transition team and having them fix it. Now, if you've got an issue with something like a cost base, or you want to make changes to how something was allocated, you can do that from the load opening balances screen. So if I go to fund and load opening balances, so when a transitions consultant fills out an Excel fund loader and loads that to class, it goes and it essentially goes and lodges itself in the load opening balances page. So this is where the opening position of the fund can be found. Now, you are free to go in here and make whatever changes you like. As I mentioned, if you went in here and discovered that the parcel history for AMP was incorrect, you could go in and make those changes yourself, or you could reject the fund in class. Now, in this scenario, there's only one parcel, so I would say that it's probably going to be quicker for you to just go in and make the change. If this asset had 30 parcels and all those parcels were incorrect, then I would recommend that you definitely reject the fund and have the transitions team fix it, rather than you going in and making those changes. But this is a load opening balances page, and so this is where you can go in and you are free to go in here and make whatever changes you require. So if you need to adjust the member balance, if you want to change the tax position, if you decide that this distribution receivable is actually a dividend receivable, you can always go in here and make those changes. Now this screen does get locked down after you complete your first year. So once you run a period update, you can no longer go back in and make changes to the load opening balances page. But while the fund is still in a status that's that's unreviewed, you can go in here and make changes to the load opening balances. I'll just reiterate that if you've got a complicated scenario where you need to make wholesale changes to the opening balance, reject the fund. If it's a very simple fix, you just need to move a balance from one field to another, or you need to make an adjustment to a member balance, by all means, you can go into the load opening balances and make that change yourself. Now, another thing that you'll find on the load opening balances page is this prior year operating statement tab. So this is where you can go in and enter your prior year operating statement comparatives. So this is not something that's currently done as part of the standard transition. So we generally ask clients to go in and enter this data in themselves once they've completed the fund, and this is where you would do it. So the fund opening position will give us the balance sheet comparatives, but the prior year operating statement comparatives will not come through as a matter of course. So you actually need to go into the prior year operating statement tab here and enter in the operating statement comparatives in here. So there are a few other steps that we generally recommend you undertake. So once you've reviewed the fund, we would also recommend that you go through and you tick off some of these next steps. So these include making sure that the fund is set up properly. So it'll include setting a chairperson and reviewing your DRP, opening balances, etc. So have a look through these user guide pages because they're very useful and they can give you some helpful next steps once you've sort of done your transitions review. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the user guide. So I have mentioned the user guide a couple of times throughout this webinar, but we've got a brand new user guide that we've just released, and we've got a brand new section on transitions. So I just wanted to talk you through very quickly some of the areas that you can go through and have a look at your own leisure once you've completed this webinar. So the first one here is loading existing entities to class. So this is where you can go in and find your checklists, and also there's a step-by-step for how to use the TMS. So if you wanted to know what you need to download or provide in order to load a fund from BGL Desktop, you can just click on the BGL Desktop link and it'll take you through step-by-step what we require and what you need to do. We've also got a section on the new fund wizard. So the new fund wizard is used primarily for funds that do not have an opening position. So these are brand new funds that have just been created. So for those funds that do not have an opening position, that are brand new funds, then you can use a new fund wizard to essentially create the basic fund details of a fund. We've also got a section on reviewing transition entities, which we just discussed. We've also got the Excel fund loader. So I've mentioned the Excel fund loader throughout this webinar. The Excel fund loader is how we load all of our funds into class. So this section goes through in quite a bit of detail how to use the fund loader. It also provides some best practice hints and tips and some traps that people fall into when they're trying to load their funds from using the Excel fund loader. So the Excel fund loader is the tool that you would use to load a fund that has got an opening position. We've got some recommended actions to first year funds. So I mentioned those already. Once you've completed a review, have a look at those and tick off any of those that you may think are relevant to your funds. And finally, we've got a section on how to transition funds from another class administrator. So if you've got a fund that's coming across from another class administrator, just go into this user guide section here and it'll take you through exactly what you need to do to load that fund into your class instance. Okay, so that about covers off what I wanted to go through in today's webinar. Just a couple of recommendations at the end of the webinar. So the first is to complete the survey. We always appreciate your feedback to help with us getting better at what we produce. So we just want to make sure that if you've got a couple of minutes, complete that survey for us. Go through and have a look at the user guide about the transitions. There's a lot of useful information in there. Go and have a look at TMS. So as I mentioned, everybody who's got access to class will also have access to TMS. So if you've got some funds that you've been holding off on loading, go in there and have a look at loading some funds. If you get lost or confused or you forget what you need to do, click on the Guide Me button. That'll take you through how you can actually load those funds. If you are loading funds from BGL Desktop, download a new copy of the class transitions tool and follow the new process. So make sure you run the reports first and then use the class transitions tool to load the files and the reports. And finally, download a fresh copy of the manual data collection form and review that and make sure you use it for the next time you're loading any manual funds to the TMS. Thank you very much for your time today. As I mentioned, we'd really appreciate it if you could complete the survey, and I hope you found this webinar useful. Thank you.